Hello, everyone. Landon Mayer here live with Umpqua Feather Merchants. I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for joining tonight's program. We're going to do a live Q&A, so feel free to enter in any questions that you have, and I'll be happy to answer any of those. I really have become a huge fan of just how successful you can be on the Stillwater game, whether it's dries, nymphs, or streamers, and a lot of my patterns are designed to help many scenarios where you can have a chance at some of these fish, whether it's in deep water settings, 15 to 20 feet, or my personal favorite, when the fish get in really, really shallow, 2 to 3 feet, and then you can have opportunities for more results that way as well. So we'll answer the Q&A. I'm going to show a couple videos tonight that I was happy to film with Umpqua this season. One of those is going to be on fly selection. We'll have that coming up in just a little bit. We'll also have some coming up a little bit later in the program with some of the locations and areas and how to target certain zones to be more successful in stillwaters. If you haven't experienced it already, it can be intimidating at times, such a large, vast body of water, and you're trying to find a few fish that are swimming right within a specific zone. So I'm happy to answer any of those questions as well. One of the first questions I see coming up tonight is, what are my favorite dry dropper rigs? And personally, I'll share two of my favorite ways to set up a dry dropper. What I found is that so many times, a lot of cruising trout or fish that are on the feed, similar to what you see in a river, for stillwater settings, a lot of these trout are swimming in depths that are only 2, 3, maybe 4 feet below the water surface. And knowing this, it's amazing how many opportunities you can have at some of these trout that are willing to swim from 4 feet and come up and lift to look or feed on the water surface. My first rig that I'm a fan of is going to be using a chubby Chernobyl or an Amy's Ant on the surface. And then below that, I'm going to drop the mini leech jig Radiant. And the cool thing about the mini leech jig Radiant is that this fly is suspended below the dry. And when it's attached with a clinch knot, it rides balanced. And when it rides balanced, any bump, wave, or movement on the surface, even a strip, is going to lift, drop, and really does jig. The second rig I really do like to use is going to be a parachute Adams or a standard dry fly on the surface, which represents the calabatus a little bit later in the season. One of my favorite hatches to fish on the stillwater game. And then that being said, for the stillwater bite with calabatus, I'll drop either a calabatus emerging nymph. One of my favorite nymphs for that is going to be Mercer's epoxy back, or I'll drop my Titan tube midge right below parachute Adams. And by doing that, it's incredible how you'll start your day with the midges, and then you'll move over to the calabatus, and then that progresses to the caddis, and then that will progress to the damsels. And by hitting all of these different food supplies, those two ways of setting up can be incredibly effective. So again, the chubby Chernobyl, the Amy's Ant on the surface, dropping the mini leech jig or the mini leech jig Radiant below that. The other surprising part is how close I'll keep these rigs. And a lot of the times when I'm using the dry dropper, it's only going to be 12 to 24 inches. Even sometimes less than that. It could be 6 to 12 inches from dry to dropper. The reason for that is if you look on the surface, and I had a post on this the other day on my Instagram page of a chironomid that was on the surface moving around like a snake, incredibly fast, almost like a damsel action, but it was only 2 inches below the surface. And with that being said, such a close food supply to the surface, you want to be able to imitate that with a dry fly, hopefully to get the fish to rise up and take. And if not, that fish then will have a chance to eat something just below. So it really does make a great difference in having the opportunity for a lot of those fish that are willing to look up, see the dry fly, and then take below. If you are fishing at a parachute Adams or something that represents a calabatus, or let's say a Goddard caddis, a little bit smaller dry fly on the surface, you can still utilize a lot of the larger patterns as long as they're designed to where they're not going to have a heavy sinking ratio. And that's the other advantage to the mini leech jig Radiant, is that it doesn't sink so fast that it'll take your dry fly down. With the skin facing off the hook shank, it actually slows that descent rate So it makes a big difference there. So a long answer, but I hope that helps out with the question, what's your favorite dry dropper rig? And with that in mind, let's go ahead and lead into the first video, which we ended up filming in early summer, going over some of the flies with good friend Jake with Umpqua. Have a chance to display what's in my box, and I try to keep it simplistic as far as different imitations to utilize or use on the water. But that being said, have a fly for each purpose, for each season, and each one of your setups can really make all the difference in the world. So we'll take a look at that video here in a minute. I hope you enjoy this clip, and afterwards I'll be happy to answer any questions about fly selection or anything else that may come about. Hope everybody's having a good evening, and most importantly, I hope everybody had some tight lines on the water today. It's good to finally see some cooling weather and some moisture moving in, which I think makes a huge difference when we're dealing with some of the Stillwater game. And in addition to that, some of our rivers as we get into the warmer season as well. The other thing to remember too, when you go into the fall, is it can really make a big difference with the cooling trend coming up. And yeah, let's go ahead and we'll pop that video on now. Bumpco wants to go ahead and put that on the screen. We'll take a look at the fly.
For rivers and stillwaters, the mini. Hello everybody, Landon here with Umpqua Feather Merchants. I'd like to share with you the new secret weapon for rivers and stillwaters, the mini leech jig in the Radiant series. So we've matched the mini leech jig with the Umpqua Radiant bead slotted series, and we have a variety of colors. It's available black and purple, rust on rust, olive on olive, black on orange, and white on pink. And in addition to matching and imitating leeches, it can also be a great way to use a variety of colors to match a variety of food. Rust can match the crayfish in the water, olive to match the damsels, orange and black egg-sucking leeches, and then white and pink just simply as an attractor. Available in sizes 12, 14, and 16. Great imitation, a great way to really fool more quality trout on rivers and stillwaters. I hope it works well for you on the water. Hello.
So there's an example of some of the color segmentations and some of the color series for the mini leech jig Radiant. One question that came up was, what is your favorite color combo for each season? And the correct answer for that is just to go through the seasons. For starting out early in the year at Ice Off, I'm a fan of using black and orange and also white and pink. The reason I like those two color combos is it gives you more of an attractant like an egg-sucking leech, or white can be a great attractant to capture the trout's attention, get them to come over and then actively take your fly. The other thing I like to teach anglers on the Stillwater front is that always remember these fish are cruising the whole time or majority of the time looking for their food supply. When Stillwater trout are feeding, a lot of times they're doing this at their own pace and their own speed. They can incredibly speed up fast where they come over and take something fast and furious, or they'll take it at a slow pace, open their mouth, open their gills, and suck in the food supply. That being said, when the fish is moving by, the two ways that you can capture their attention is number one, you can have movement to the fly. And most importantly, you can have coloration or flash. And that's why white and pink really does work well. And how many times have you been out there as a fly fisher and you've been on the river or you've been on the Stillwater bite? You've seen the anglers on the shore or on the boat, and they're absolutely crushing with the white tube jigs. They're jigging up from the bottom, keeping that fly or that imitation bouncing up and down just above the vegetation or right off of a shelf, and wham, the fish comes over and nails it. So many times I've seen that, and that's why I really lean towards a lot of the white scenarios, just because it's a great attractor. And black and orange, of course, to match the egg-sucking leeches. As we move into the summer season, the cool thing about the damsel is that you can really have a lot of these food supplies come over, and it really does allow opportunities for trout to see the olive to match the damsel, rust to match the crayfish, and black, of course, to match the leeches. It really does work well. If you can, we'll go ahead and move into the next video clip too. With that being said, locations on where to target trout and some of the opportunities in using damsel flies, imitations of damsels, imitations of food supplies for shallow water, and also imitations for deeper water scenarios. But most importantly, where to look, where to target trout. And we'll go ahead and answer those questions next.
Hello everybody, Landon here with Umpqua Feather Merchants. I'd like to share with you a tip on one of my favorite new areas to try to hunt trout, stillwaters. Now when you look at stillwaters, this can be a very intimidating zone. Large, vast, deep body of water, large, shallow bays, and you're wondering, where can I find the trout? How do I even begin to think about approaching this different fishery? The three things I look for: number one, always look for drop lines, a change in depth. And a lot of time that change is going to have different colors. So you go from tan to dark green, light brown to dark blue. Those areas where you have a drop line, the fish will cruise in on the drop line, come into the shallows, and actively feed. The second thing I look for are intercepting points. Anywhere you have a point extending into the still water, the trout are forced to cruise around that point. If you stand there as an angler, that's a great area to intercept the fish as they're swimming by. And then lastly, but one of the key, is structure points. Whether it's boulders, vegetation, anywhere you can look into still water where there's structures so the trout can hide. One of my personal favorite for that is vegetation clumps. Vegetation clumps provide food for the fish and allow them, as they cruise in and out, to remain protected under cover. So think about those three tips and locations, areas that you can target and hunt trout on the next stillwater adventure, and I hope you find more success.
Thanks for showing that video clip. That brings back some great memories. Always awesome time when you see the fish take, most importantly, jump eye level. Nothing better than getting the blood pumping than that. Couple questions that came in. First question is, do you need a boat to fish stillwater? And that is a wonderful question. And the answer to that is you do not need a boat. A boat can be great for navigating stillwater zones to get to specific locations with a hurry. A boat's also nice to navigate deep water. But what I found is it's a 50-50 game. There are times in the season, like the chironomid bite early, when the trout are deep and they rely on these deep zones for cover and safety, and that's where you can find the fish to actively feed. But don't give up on the hunting game by foot. It's incredible how many of the largest trout you find are literally within water that's 16 inches or less. When they're that shallow in a zone, and you know that that fish is cruising around that shallow point or shallow peninsula point, it can really make a difference and give you more opportunities for a lot of these fish to take. So the answer for that is 50-50, 50 boat, 50 on foot. If you do not have a boat, do not give up. Look at the edges. It's where a lot of these bugs are hatching and popping. And the key there is structure, drop lines, and vegetation, like you just saw in the video. Another question I received as well is, what is your favorite streamer imitation? And one of my favorite streamers of all time for stillwater is going to be John Barr's meat whistle. The reason I love this imitation is that you can do multiple retrieves and be effective. You can retrieve it really fast or quick to where it moves in the water swiftly. It almost looks like a bait fish with a jigging motion up and down. If you find trout that are cruising along the edge looking for the crayfish, one of the secrets in imitating crayfish is you want it to stop, you want it to drop, and then you want that fly to roll. And when it stop, drops, and rolls like the crayfish do after the escape, they'll pause, they'll stop, and then they drop. That's a great advantage to using the meat whistles. You can lift it, stop it, drop it down, and allow it to sit there, pulsate, undulate, and breathe. And it's amazing how many fish react to that. Color combos, my two favorite colors are going to be rust and then ginger and blue when we're dealing with the streamer bite. My other favorite streamer is going to be Gallup's Tips Up. That's a great imitation with two foam sections that are put in the back hook on the articulated fly that allows that fly to lift up, similar to the meat whistle, pulsate and undulate, and really does cause a lot of commotion. It makes a huge difference in how successful you can be. The other thing to remember about streamers is don't always be quick on the retrieve. A lot of these fish, when they're cruising around looking for their food, they're more apt to take it when it stops and when it's dropping, just like a bass would, rather than trying to hit that fly as it's quickly moving around the water. So always be sure to mix up the retrieve and give that fly the opportunity to stop, drop, and roll, and also pause quite a bit as well. Other questions that are coming in. Do you think lake maps make a big difference and help out the topography? I really do. Before we even investigate a fishery, I'm a fan of looking at the lake's map and also knowing the drop lines and a lot of the structure points. I learned this technique years back, about 10 years ago, is when we first started fishing Pyramid Lake. And in fishing Pyramid Lake, I realized quickly you need to know where the drop lines are. And most importantly, not just the drop line to know where that fly is going to drop and go from shallow down to a deep zone. We also want shallow lines and deep lines to know how far out you have to go. It's common on Pyramid Lake to believe you have to be out on a ladder. Some of these drop lines, just like our local home waters in South Park, can be literally 10 to 15 feet from shore. So that makes a huge difference as well. But looking at a map, figuring out the drop lines, peninsula points, the bays, and the drop zones makes a huge difference. Back-to-back question. How do you manage stripping lines on still waters versus streams? And managing and stripping line can be, there's a lot to that question, but here's some of the answers, and I hope this helps out. Whenever you're dealing with line on still water and trying to manage it, there's a couple things to remember. Whenever you have a sinking line, you always want to think about having a stripping basket. And I'm a fan of Scientific Angler's new foam stripping basket. Incredibly lightweight. If you're traveling, a couple options too, if you don't have a stripping basket or you forgot one, is you can get a plastic container and use the bungee cord, or my personal favorite is take your fish pond net, have it placed to the side of your body with the basket open. That becomes a stripping basket. And in dealing with the line and talking about retrieves, when you're dealing with retrieves on still water, always start short and slow or short and fast, and then increase the speed. And the reason for that is you're trying to intercept a moving target. So unlike a river setting where you have the trout holding in the zone, in the water in front of you, All right, I think we're live. We're back on here again. Sorry for that little bit of delay. Came in while we had a little glitch. One of them is my favorite fly lines, and I'll mention 3 lines that I really do like to use for a lot of the Stillwater setups. And my first line for dry flies is going to be the MPX line from Scientific Anglers, the Amplitude series. The reason I love that line is because it's got a heavy, thick front taper. It's got a nice taper to it as well, to where it's not too thick on the front end. It goes midsection, tapers thin, so you still get a semi-soft landing. But that heavy load and that longer taper in the front of 25 to 30 feet allows you to pick up with one back cast, pause, and then deliver the dry fly. The reason that's important is that when you're dealing with Stillwater dries, a lot of these fish are, so the fish may be moving left to right, and you see the trout rise. You can't cast just above the rise form. You actually have to lead the fish by 15, 20 feet. That's why that first pickup, that quick laydown can make all the difference in the world. The other line I've become a huge fan of is the Camo line. The Camo sink line, it's an intermediate sinking line, and multiple brands can be made from other companies. I like using, of course, Scientific Anglers, but the advantage to using an intermediate line that's camouflaged with multi-colors from tan to green to clear, and it only sinks at 1 inch per second, is that you can retrieve flies or imitate any of the food supplies, which most of these food supplies in Stillwaters are constantly moving all the way around the water column. So whether it's up or down or side to side, you can mimic that horizontal movement. A really short, quick retrieve, 1 to 2 inches at a time. The technique I call the Johnny Cash can make all the difference in the world, and allowing a lot of those flies to move at a slow pace and give the trout a chance to come over and take it. For the streamer bite, or let's say a sinking line, I'm a fan of using the triple density line. Instead of having line sag where the fly line lands before the fly and it sinks before the fly and it slows the presentation down, instead with the triple density line, the line's going to sink at an angle to where the tip of the line is the heaviest, then midsection, then running line, so the fly is the first thing in view to the trout. So I hope that helps in the reference with my hand to show the sinking rate, but that makes a huge difference whenever you're dealing with a lot of these Stillwater scenarios where you have to start high in the column all the way up at the top, and then you want to work your way slowly down, eventually reaching some of those deeper drop lines and some of those deeper zones. Another question I receive is, what size X or tippet and leader do you use on a regular basis? I would say the most common sizes when you're dealing with these large trout are going to be anywhere from 4 to 3 to 2X, and even greater if you're doing the streamer bite. But if you try to get away using 5X, it's not that you won't hook the fish. The challenge is just simply how strong these trout truly are. And there's a great question that came in about fighting fish we'll answer next. But when you're dealing with strong trout and you're dealing with a lot of teeth, because these fish are used to eating larger food supplies, you want to keep that in mind. You don't want to risk going in with something light. Always give yourself the upper hand. And I would at least start by thinking about 4X, and again, going up to 3, 2, and 1X. You want to be anywhere in that 6-pound or greater size range for breaking strength. And from there, you should be safe and good to go for the rest of it. Now, when you're dealing with fighting trout, here's a good question that came in. How do you like to set the hook, or what tips do you have on setting the hook where you don't break the fish off? And I have to laugh because it's the hook set term that drives me nuts. I love setting the hook. I love teaching setting the hook because it's that exciting moment when you know the trout is taking your fly and the battle's on. I'm a bigger fan, though, instead of calling it the set, I'm a fan of calling it a hook lift. And the reason for that is that the trout is taking the fly. So whether it lifted to the surface to eat the dry fly, swam up and the fish has come over and taken the nymph or the streamer, all you're going to do to set the hook is you're lifting the rod. And by doing that, you want to elevate your arm and the rod at the same time. So it's almost like a convex bend, like a rainbow, where you have the arc in the rod. You don't want to come up vertically where the fish goes the other direction. You get too much over application of power, and then the fish pops and breaks. Instead, by lifting up, you can allow that fish to run, point at the fish, and let the reel do its job. The other running joke is if you need an excuse to go out and buy a brand new fly reel, and the craziness in the world today, if you picked up fly fishing or you've been a fan of this passion and sport for a while, it's an excuse to know that your reel's going to work when you hit Stillwater. I kid you not, it's not uncommon for some of these trout to literally take you all the way into your backing. So going on beyond the hook set, when you get up on the fish and you have the bend and you have the arc, from that position, when the fish runs, the biggest challenge in fighting a trout is this. The fish, it's common that they'll literally bolt. And when they bolt, they can run 120 feet. They'll go there as fast as they possibly can. But the kicker is they'll turn and come back just as fast. And when that fish comes back just as fast, you have two options. You can try to reel up on the fish, or you can try to strip line. And if you strip line, the other fighting tip I have is you want to strip with the rod, reel, and your hand in front of your face. Don't try to do it with your arms above your head because you can't see anything. If you do it from this position, you can strip, maintain leverage and pressure, and continue the battle. And if need be, you can always feed line back out. It makes a huge difference in trying to deal with some of these selective trout. What's your setup recommendation for the remainder of the season this year? That's a great question that just came in. So my recommendation for the remainder of the season is what I'm doing now is I'm starting out with the chironomids in the morning. There's a nice midge bite in the morning. You can also have some attractors like beetles that pop off early before the sun really peaks out. Once you get that chironomid bite, it's going to lead into some calabatus, followed by some trailing damsels and some caddis. And as far as recommending rigs and setups, I usually start out with an attractor and then I drop a chironomid below that. If it's not a dry fly, I can do that with the nymph as well. And I'll use my Titan 2 midge in a variety of colors. I'll do black and silver and black and red. The thing to remember when you attach the chironomid is try to do this with a loop knot so that way when the fly is on the loop knot, it's going to lift and drop and move just like those crazy moving chironomids do on a regular basis. The other rig I'll have following that is going to be the calabatus, and below the calabatus, either a calabatus nymph like Mike Mercer's epoxy back, or I'll drop the mini leech jig damsel imitation, which is that olive with the radiant bead, and that mini leech jig radiant olive is going to hold below that calabatus and act like some of those swimming damsels. So those are a couple of my rigs and ways that I'm approaching the season. Lastly, when we move past the summer months and we go into the fall, just remember a lot of the hatches will leave or subside or disperse. That doesn't mean the trout are no longer going to be aggressive. In fact, a lot of these fish are still looking for their food. That's when the streamer bite kicks in, and that's when the meat whistle can really shine. So keep that in mind as you move into the fall. Another questions, or a few questions that came in, are you always sight fishing? I'm not always sight fishing looking for a trout, but that's a great question, and it's pretty broad, and a couple of the answers are, I'm sight fishing when I have a chance to see the trout in clear water. But I'm also looking for a variety of things. And what I believe as a trout hunter or a sight fisherman, you gain an advantage because you have situational awareness. You're looking around you on a regular basis. You're aware of not only the water surface, you're aware of birds when they start to feed to let you know a hatch is starting to build or a hatch is starting to land. You can look for wakes or movement on the edge, looking for the color change, most importantly, where you have vegetation and a sandbar meet together, or you have that drop line. And then also visually looking for any area where you can intercept the trout when they swim around a peninsula point. So a lot of those are locations and areas and ways that you are sight fishing. Now, a couple sight fishing tips are these. When you're looking for rising trout, one of the things you want to think about is that when the fish is eating on a regular basis, you want to look for the head and tail. And if you can't see the whole body, just remember the trout's tail is like an arrow. So when that arrow is in front of you, you then know what direction that fish is moving, and then you can lead that fish by 10, even 20 feet if it's moving at a fast pace. The other thing to remember is that when you're looking for the fish to take, most large trout, when they eat in still waters, they're not always aggressive. In fact, some of these fish are moving at such a slow pace, the lightest subtle movement of an indicator, the simple sip of a nose on a dry fly or even the slight pause on a streamer, that can be the biggest fish you'll hook into. So always keep that in mind when you're dealing with the sight fishing game. Oh, this question's coming in from Henry Cohen, one of my good buddies. Went and did some striper bass fishing. Congratulations on the new book, my man. I can't wait till it comes out and get a chance for that to be in the memory bank and also in the library. Is it true that you're switching from catching trout to hybrid stripers? Yes, it is true. It's a great question. I'm a huge fan, and a big question I receive is, what type of fishing for other species have you done during your years as a guide or just your years as an angler? And I think hybrid stripers are not only intense, they're fun. I love the challenge of depth control, and like we've done, Henry, on your boat, trying to find the schools when they're moving up and down. And I also love the challenge of just new species. You can always find techniques and strategies and ways to deliver flies, present flies, fight fish that you can apply back home when you're dealing with the trout game. And it really does make all the difference in the world. I've learned so much of this is based on seasons, especially when we do the stripers like you've been kind enough to show me. And that also can be applied back to the trout game. In fact, most of my techniques for fighting fish stem from the tarpon days in my 20s, where, yes, I had buyer's remorse because I spent all my money going on tarpon trips and saltwater trips, coming home and eating ramen noodles. But at the time, it was worth all the expense and all the drama coming back and trying to make back the money, because I learned how to apply leverage. And that really did make all the difference in the world. And being able to get that proper bend and know that you're fighting the fish with maximum potential and power, and you prevent that fish from breaking off. Most importantly, you get the fish in quickly, and it has a chance to swim off and fight another day. Another question that's coming in is, how often do you target shallow water? And that's a great question. You know, for me, as an angler looking at a Stillwater setup and just trying to look at everything in front of me for the day, how am I going to get myself into fish? Most importantly, clients into fish. When clients are with me, where do we target? What are the zones? And I am shocked. Whether it was doing the Great Lakes in my 20s, whether it's the Stillwaters and South Parks, my home waters, traveling to Pyramid Lake, some of the Stillwaters in South America, it is a common theme, which is really cool. Most of the largest trout I've seen, I've landed, but most importantly had clients land, have been in waters that are incredibly shallow. And these shallow waters, I'm talking about areas where it's only 2 feet, maximum depth is 5 feet. In fact, my biggest trout from Pyramid Lake that finally exceeded the 20-pound mark was literally caught in 3.5 feet of water right at sunrise in this giant feeding flat, and the fish damn near ripped the rod right out of my hand. I had to actually grab the rod, actually pulled it out of my hand, lift it up. I grabbed the rod again in mid-flight, continued the battle. Of course, got razzed by my buddies later about being able to catch the rod mid-flight. They said it was like Miyagi trying to catch flies with chopsticks, which was pretty much the case. But it was great just knowing that there was opportunities for catching fish in the shallow environment. So the question that came in earlier about whether you wade fish or you do it from a boat, it can be just as effective. The largest trout in shallow water makes a huge difference. Another question that came in is, what are your favorite times of day to fish Stillwater? That's an amazing question, and it really is important when you're following the food. When you're dealing with shallow water, just remember this: the trout have to be encouraged to enter the shallow water zone. So you may show up in a giant bay or a giant feeding flat at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you don't see any trout moving, and you don't see any sign of life. And you're thinking, man, how in the world am I going to find fish? And there's nothing here. Then all of a sudden, if you wait 2 hours, it's slow, the hatch picks up. Then you see these bugs starting to emerge, these bugs starting to mate and land, and next thing you know, it explodes. When you're timing on Stillwaters, the time of day, you want to think about, number one, the food supply. You also want to think about where to position yourself to be effective. So if I were to go out tomorrow and fish Stillwaters, knowing that we're transitioning from summer, and in 3 weeks we're going to go into the fall and the cooling season, I would probably start my morning deep in water. So I'd be in waters that are going to be anywhere from, I'd say, 6 to 10 feet. Then I'd switch locations in the midday to afternoon, and I'd fish water that's probably only 2 to 4 feet in depth. And I'd start to concentrate on some of the bays, knowing that there's going to be a pretty good hatch that take place. And then to end the day, I'd go back to the deep water hunt, try to find the fish that are still aggressive and moving quickly, and see if I can get those fish over on some of the streamer bites. And I really do think that makes a huge difference. Another question that came in earlier was, what are my home waters and where do I like to fish around my home water zone? So in the state of Colorado, we seriously are blessed. I mean, we have so many opportunities and so many great fisheries when it comes to still waters, but I personally love fishing 11 Mile, Antero, and Spinney reservoirs. These are my home waters. The real advantage to these still waters is it teaches you a ton as an angler, where you can go in the still waters of 11 Mile, and that's 120 feet deep. So you're talking about the deepest still water we have in South Park. Then we go down to Spinney Reservoir. Spinney Reservoir is 45 feet deep at the dam, and then Antero Reservoir, which is 16 feet at the dam. So each one of these still waters gives you a different setup and scenario where you're dealing with warmer water, cooling water, and different water depths. But these are my three favorite areas to target and some of my favorite zones to really hit and pursue fish. So I think that makes a giant difference whenever you're dealing with your home waters and traveling abroad. But the question that came in earlier, do you look at maps and do you concentrate on a lot of the topography of the fishery? I really do encourage you to do that, whether it be high mountain lakes or some of the still waters down in lower elevation where you can find some of these fish actively feeding. A question that didn't come up tonight, but a question my client asked the other day. This is a great question. How long can a trout live in a deep still water setting? And that's an amazing question. The reason I wanted to bring that up tonight is I did a piece with fly fishermen called Altitude Sickness about 4 years ago. And in doing this piece, I interviewed our local fishery biologist, Jeff Spoon. And Jeff Spoon shared a story with me in one of the high alpine lakes they ended up doing some studies in. They found some of the larger fish in this high alpine lake. This is incredible. We're living up to 22 to 24 years in age. Incredible to think that a trout can live that long. But some of these large high alpine lakes are in giant craters, incredibly deep. And if the trout has access to an ample food supply and high protein, and they can be cold in the semi-lethargic state holding deep, it's incredible just how long these fish can live. And it's not uncommon, whether you're in the Great Lakes, Pyramid Lakes, or South Park, you really do have opportunities for some of these larger trout to come over and take the fly, but most importantly, live and exceed 20 years. It's just amazing how truly large some of these fish can get. And I'd like to share with you before we leave tonight, we're winding down in some of our minutes here, where we're going to share the video again one more time, discussing some of the opportunities on still waters. And what you'll see in this video clip for the second time is that we're going to discuss areas to locate. Whenever I'm discussing still waters with a client or trying to teach somebody where to pursue fish, I always think about three zones. The three areas I'm going to look for are drop lines, where you get color change, peninsula points where you can intercept cruising trout, and then also a personal favorite are structure zones where you have vegetation, rocks, or something down deep in the water, and it really does make a huge difference. So we'll go ahead and share this video clip. I hope you enjoyed and have a chance to see some of the tips about targeting fish in still waters that can be incredibly intimidating at times.
Hello everybody, Landon here with Umpqua Feather Merchants. I'd like to share with you a tip on one of my favorite new areas to try to hunt trout, still waters. Now when you look at still waters, this can be a very intimidating zone. Large, vast, deep body of water, large, shallow bays, and you're wondering, where can I find the trout? How do I even begin to think about approaching this different fishery? The three things I look for: number one, always look for drop lines, a change in depth. And a lot of time that change is going to have different colors. So you go from tan to dark green, light brown to dark blue. Those areas where you have a drop line, the fish will cruise in on the drop line, come into the shallows, and actively feed. The second thing I look for are intercepting points. Anywhere you have a point extending into the still water, the trout are forced to cruise around that point. If you stand there as an angler, that's a great area to intercept the fish as they're swimming by. And then lastly, but one of the key is structure points. Whether it's boulders, vegetation, anywhere you can look into still water where there's structures so the trout can hide. One of my personal favorite for that is vegetation clumps. Vegetation clumps provide food for the fish and allow them as they cruise in and out to remain protected under cover. So think about those 3 tips and locations, areas that you can target and hunt trout on the next Stillwater adventure, and I hope you find more success.
Thanks, Umpqua, for sharing that video. And again, those 3 points. So drop lines, intercepting points, and structure really do make a huge difference. So the big question, last 2 questions here. Do I have any bugs coming up with Umpqua? I'm happy to announce that in January, I have a brand new fly. Incredibly excited about it. It's the mini leech jig damsel. It's going to be available with Umpqua. This is a pattern I've used for many years on Stillwaters. It's incredible just how well it imitates the natural. It's a balanced fly, really does mimic the movement. And again, the mini leech jig damsel will be available in a few months with Umpqua. So keep an eye out for that. And during the pandemic, when we were all stuck at home, I decided to take on the challenge of taking studio shots or step tie photos. And I'm also happy to announce that with Stack Pool, I'm going to do in Headwater Books. I have a fly tying book that is now available here this coming winter. It'll include all of my patterns with Umpqua, 6 additional imitations that not are always found commercially. And it really does go through the step-by-step. So we'll discuss the origin of the fly, the history, how to rig the fly, how to fish the fly, of course, how to do the step ties. And most importantly, there's 16 illustrations in the book. So I'm happy to share that with you. The new fly, the new book. Thank you so much for everybody for tuning in this evening. It really is amazing to have a chance to share the information on and off the water. I wish everybody tremendous success out there. And if you have any questions after tonight, feel free to reach out through my website, landonmareflyfishing.com. Check out Umpqua's site. They have some other great events coming up. I know they have other good individuals to share some great information like Devin Olson. Check out Blaine and some of the other guys that are in the industry right now doing great stuff. It really is an opportunity to share some of the information and knowledge, and I truly am grateful for that. So I hope you guys all enjoyed tonight's program. And if there's any questions that come up later, please check them out. And some of the flies available at Umpqua, the mini leech jig radiant, the tube midge, Titan tube midge, Mare's Myces, and the tails up trico are all available through Umpqua's website and some of the great shops abroad. Really appreciate everybody's support, and thanks for tuning in tonight. Hope everybody has a great evening.